Welcome. I am Asa Lannon, the Chief Executive Officer for Innovaro, and this is part 7 in our series Innovation for Executives. And in this section, we're going to take a look at implementation. This is also the final section in our series. In this section, we want to talk about implementation. And if you remember from earlier, we talked about the 4 I's: ideation, incubation, investigation, implementation. Ideation, how do we get original ideas? Incubation, how do we develop into platforms? Investigation, how do we make sure they're going to work and what we need to do to make them. And implementation is really then all about taking them from the conceptual stage into the marketplace. And I want to talk a little bit in particular about implementation. This is really about commercialization. This is about the transitioning from innovation into commercialization. And it's not a replacement, it's not a product lifecycle management, it's not system development life cycles, or even a product introduction process, which many companies have. It's not meant to replace those, it's not meant to take the place of those or any of that nature. This is really all about supplementing those. And implementation from an innovation perspective is all about learning, right? So it's not going to replace your traditional product line development. It's not going to replace your traditional project management, but it's about learning. It's about learning the key things you need and balancing the competencies between innovation and marketplace management. So how do we do that? What do we really do? Well, innovation from a commercial and station standpoint and the implementation is all about combining innovation with marketplace management. It's experimentation, and that's what we focus on in this part. And what we really want to do here is to quickly and easily examine what are our go-to-market alternatives, what are all of the different methods we could use to do that, and then the emphasis is on continued research, and the goal is learning what is unknown before you throw your full weight and your resources and that behind a project. Because once you make those commitments, they're both hard to turn off, and the cost goes up and ramps very dramatically. So during this period of learning, what you're really looking to do is address knowledge gaps and assumptions that could lead your team astray and take them in a direction that might work but may not be your most beneficial. So if we look at gaining knowledge, we're really into the question of what are the really important things that we must know. And they really simply are, the things about what's not readily available via existing research or experts. We use these on an ongoing basis to help guide us, but there are things that we just don't know that aren't out there. And if you're like myself, we've all gone and looked for things that they're just not an answer to this question, right? So then we need to figure out what can be learned through additional research, right? What else do we need to know, right? And what can be learned through experiments? Because if you can learn things through additional research, that's worth doing. Some things you can't. Some things you only learn through experiment, right? So that's what you're really looking at doing in this. So what are the goals of experimentation? Well, the main goal of experimentation is to drive learning faster than commitment. You want to know where you're going, know what likely outcomes are before you really start moving really rapidly with a lot of resources. Some of the fundamentals are really pretty easy. Does anyone want it? Or as the common phrase is, will the dogs eat the dog food, right? Second one is, can we do it? If this is something that's fundamentally new, if it's a new business model, if it's a new channel model, can we actually carry this out? And I can tell you from my own personal experience, in working in one of the large computer companies many years ago when I joined, they had the technology to build more than one product line. They had a sales force that was used to selling in one particular way, and the new product line, which I was responsible to bring up and bring on board, required a whole different sales cycle, a different set of people you called on, had different kinds of parameters, financials, and all that. So can we do it? How do we actually make this work was fundamentally a different question, right? And then last but not least, can we make money? Is this good for us? Does it improve our margins? Does it make our margins worse? How long before we start to get payback on this for those kinds of things? So those are some of the simple goals of experimentation. So let's talk a little bit about what are the types of experiments. And one of the first ones is what they call a cardboard prototype. And what you see here, I think, is actually one of the early cardboard prototypes for the one of the early Dyson vacuums that was out there. But cardboard prototypes are all about, can the design concept be tested cheaply? And I have to tell you, I really like the idea of 3D printers, being able to actually take something from a drawing, create something people can lay their hands on, can turn and twist. Describing a Rubik's Cube and actually having one in your hands are two very, very different kinds of things, right? And then if it's a services offering, can it be prototyped with a manual infrastructure? Can you do this without putting all the automated infrastructure in place? Another one you can do is you can do simulated test markets. And these are really about employees leading customers or affinity groups that will offer useful feedback, or trials in single stores. I think Kraft actually did this with their Italian dinnerables some period of time ago. And if you go into most warehouse stores, you'll see somebody there that's giving out free samples of products. And I will tell you quite simply, they measure their success and their uptake on whether or not that product goes off the shelves on those days where someone's there to make that happen. It's a very, very easy thing to do, right? Another one is having a product that's a limited product, limited in scope. And this is very common, particularly with service products and with software products, where you may not have everything, but you have kind of a light version of it. And you can use that light version to see how people relate to it, whether they like it, what they tell you about it, and those kinds of things. Another one, quite simply, is experimental brand. AT&T did a thing called Connect and Save, which was something entirely off of the AT&T brand. It's a radical new concept. It was tested under a non-dominant brand. And I can laugh about this one a little bit because I happen to know from history that once there was a musician that always wondered if people would buy popular records that had harmonica music in it. So he created harmonica music in a record that they recorded, that they released under a different name. The name he used was Evans Rednow. And Evans Rednow is actually Stevie Wonder spelled backwards. And what he wanted to see was anybody would buy that. And of course, they bought it, and then they came out with who it was really from. So it's testing under a different brand. Another one is sharing testing with potential partners. And this is one where you look to use alliances to probe new markets. Frankly, we do that as a way to enter new markets with our partners on a regular basis. It's something that Canon was very successful with when they were entering the U.S. market. They didn't know what to do or where to go, per se, with the products they wanted, and so they found partners to do that. And last but not least are analogs, and that's what can you learn from others' ventures. And we just had an example of this in an innovation journey that we worked with, where the people were looking at how they provided services internally to their people, and they looked externally at the health marketplace and said, how do people in the health marketplace want to be treated? What's the kinds of things that are important to them as they move forward? So analogs are a very, very important part of that. When you look at developing experiments, you really want to plan the experiment with fairly ambitious time and cost limitations. We talk about fail fast, fail early, fail cheap. And that's what this is all about, is it's getting things out of the way quickly and cheaply. Because the likelihood is they're not going to work the first time. You need to do things. You got to get your resources set up. And the more resources it takes, the longer it'll just take you to get it rolling, much less of the cost. The second one is you better figure out your metrics in front. What are you going to measure? Are you going to measure the product flying off the shelf today? Are you going to measure the product going off the shelf in 2 weeks? What are the things that you want to know, right? And then the other one is, how do you measure the results? Now, we talk about product going off the shelf fairly easily, but let's talk about a product that's got maybe a longer cycle in it, to where you sell the initial product, and then there's lead time to buy more and to upgrade and to do kinds of things. You got to know how you're going to measure those results. And then this is one of the toughest ones, is stepping back and saying, what are the likely outcomes of the experiment that you're planning? Where do you expect this to get you, right? What do you think your alternatives are? And from there, then, are the results likely to be conclusive? If you know what the likely outcomes are, if your results are conclusive, you're in great shape. But if they're not conclusive, you may need to adjust the design of the experiment and go back and do it again. And that's why quick, cheap, and easy experiments are really important to do. And then last but not least is, okay, so you've got the outcome you wanted. What do you do next? It's not the time to start planning when you find out that you've got something really good on your hands or something really bad. Right. So what are the challenges that come out of this that you really want to look at? The first one I'll tell you is that you want to use a real project. Don't create something artificial. Don't create something that's special off to one side. Use a real project and run it as a pilot. And part of this means that you're going to have a close interaction between the people that are all about your innovation competency and the people that traditionally run your marketplace, your marketplace managers. And one of the ways you make this happen is you assign a business lead who really owns this to make it relevant for the business, because that way you're really consolidating the innovation competencies and marketplace management under a single person. Right. The second one is really challenging established processes and conflicting priorities are just part of what's going to happen. everybody's got a day job. Everybody's got processes they use. Everybody's got priorities. And what you're really asking them to do is to do things that are new, do things that are different, to step outside of what they traditionally do and take a look at some of these things and try them, sometimes for the first time. My experience has been that once people get their hands around this and learn how to use it, they adapt it and adopt it and make it part of what they do in their ongoing process. But you have to be careful not to let the experimentation and commercialization pieces of it overrun your marketplace management, because that's important to do. And then when you're going after new knowledge in search of opportunities, it really does cross into other people's sandboxes, right? And trade-offs that some teams have to make are hard to balance with day-to-day operations of an established business. It really begs a need for openness about learning and experimentation, since it's not intended to challenge the initiatives or decisions that were made in the past, but to really explore upside opportunities in a learning organization. What are some of the pitfalls? Some of the pitfalls are very straightforward. Even when the business benefits are evident, organizations that are tight in resources, and who isn't these days, have a tendency to focus on established mechanisms. It's easy to do what we've always done. We know it. We understand it. Don't ask us to change. Second one is that doing something new requires setting time aside, right? And I've run major programs on change management. How do you get people to take risks that they're not used to? It takes a push from leadership. It really does take a commitment from the leadership to get people to step up and really own this and do it. And then one of the common responses you're going to see is people will challenge the experiments, right? They're going to say, oh, that's not going to tell us anything we don't already know. In some cases, they may be right, just so you know that. The solution to this is really a cultural change, and that's not going to happen overnight. As Thomas Edison said, we know 1,000 ways not to build a light bulb. They got so many wrong it wasn't funny, right? So having the right people involved in the experiment planning provides the right context and will convert people into supporters. So what are some of the other implications that add value in here, though? Experimentation can create value in other instances. Let's say that you've already got a concept that's entered a stage gate process that's going through. You can always go back and take a look at that and say, hey, look, what are the experiments that we could run that would help us to know more about this as we get ready to bring it to market? And projects that didn't go through an innovation process, cost and quality issues, those kinds of things are really, really particularly well suited for that. Innovations that really wind up requiring a really innovative go-to-market approaches, generally, a lot of these are not conceived during the front-end process. You've got to do something fundamentally different in the back end to get the message out, to get the people to get the dogs to try the dog food. Right? So experimentation is a good way to do that. And last but not least out of this is that just before launch, if you've got a significant disruption in the marketplace that puts your original assumptions at risk, you better go try things, because you could have a big launch and no success. So this is an easy way to experiment and try things, right? One of the other things that we found is that this process actually helps to uncover things that companies already know. We've tried that in the past. It didn't work. I will guarantee you that there's a lot of that knowledge that's embedded and buried in your organization that's not visible. And through experimentation, as part of commercialization, as part of innovation, it'll bring that knowledge up. It'll make it visible and it'll make it valuable. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and that is the end of the series. Goodbye.